They didn't see it coming. When the cops pulled over this calm, confident guy, they thought it would be business as usual. A few questions, flash a badge, and move on. But what unfolded next was nothing short of a masterclass in standing your ground while knowing your rights. This wasn't some angry shouting match or heated exchange. No, this guy played it cool. He handled them like a total professional. As the officers tried to assert their authority, he respectfully yet firmly reminded them of the limits of their power. The tension was palpable. The more they pushed, the more he leaned into his knowledge of the First Amendment and the right to refuse identification. Each question they threw at him, he calmly deflected with poise and precision, leaving the officers scrambling for their next move. It wasn't about being anti-police. It was about exercising his rights in a way that left everyone watching in awe. Just when it seemed like they'd corner him, he turned the tables completely. How did he do it? And what was the officers' reaction when they realized they were dealing with someone who knew the law better than they expected? Let's dive in and find out. The story began with what seemed like a routine stop. The officers had their questions lined up, and they expected compliance. But from the moment this guy rolled down his window, it was clear this wasn't going to be an ordinary encounter. He wasn't hostile or aggressive, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he spoke, as if he had prepared for this moment long before it happened. The officers asked for identification. Most people would have handed it over without hesitation, not wanting any trouble. But this guy knew the rules. He calmly asked if he was being detained or if he was free to go, keeping his tone steady and respectful. You could see the officers pause, a flicker of surprise in their faces. They weren't expecting someone to question their authority. Not like this, at least. And here's the thing. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't breaking the law, causing a disturbance, or giving them any valid reason to escalate the situation. Yet the tension in the air was undeniable. Why were they so insistent? And how would they handle someone who clearly knew his rights inside and out? The situation was heating up, and the outcome was anything but certain. The officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure of how to proceed. One of them stepped forward, adopting a firmer tone, but the man didn't flinch. He repeated the same question. Am I being detained, or am I free to go? It wasn't an act of defiance. It was calm, calculated, and entirely within his rights. The lead officer, clearly frustrated, tried to pivot. We just need to know who you are. It's standard procedure. But the man wasn't buying it. He explained with a surprising amount of patience that unless they had reasonable suspicion of a crime, he wasn't required to show ID. He even referenced case law, which caught them off guard. Meanwhile, you could feel the unease growing. The other officer began circling the vehicle, as if searching for a reason to justify their actions. The man stayed composed, his hands visible, his words precise. He wasn't giving them any reason to escalate, and that seemed to frustrate them even more. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just his knowledge. It was how he handled the pressure. The officers clearly didn't expect someone to stand their ground so confidently. But what would happen next? Would they back off, or would the situation take an unexpected turn? The air was thick with tension now, and you could almost hear the wheels turning in the officers' heads. They weren't used to someone like this, a person who knew the law and refused to be intimidated. One officer leaned against the car, his voice firm but strained, repeating, "We need your cooperation here." But the man didn't waver. He leaned slightly out of his window, his tone still respectful but unshakable, and said, "Cooperation doesn't mean giving up my rights." The officers were at a crossroads. On one hand, they had no solid reason to escalate. On the other, letting this man go without seeing his ID felt like a blow to their authority. The lead officer took a step back, radioing in for something, backup, perhaps, or advice on what to do next. The man stayed still, hands on the wheel, his calm demeanor unwavering. People nearby had started to notice the interaction, and a small crowd was forming at a distance. Some filmed quietly, sensing the unusual dynamic unfolding. The officers, now visibly uneasy, seemed caught between two decisions: double down or back off. The stakes were high, and the next few moments could determine how this entire situation would play out. Just when it seemed like the officers were starting to back off, the radio crackled with a response. The lead officer listened carefully, his expression shifting slightly. He stepped back toward the man's car, but this time, his tone was different, more determined. "We've got confirmation on something," he said vaguely, as if trying to create leverage. But the man wasn't fazed. "Confirmation on what?" he asked calmly, his voice steady. The officer didn't answer directly, sidestepping the question. Instead, he hinted at a possible match for a description they'd been given earlier. It was an obvious attempt to dig for a reason to escalate. The man, without hesitation, asked, "Am I now being accused of something specific? Because if so, I'd like to know." The crowd watching from a distance grew larger, their phones still recording. The tension skyrocketed as the second officer, who had been silent up to this point, approached the car and began pressing for answers in a more aggressive tone. But the man remained composed. He pointed out again that without any valid accusation, he was within his rights to refuse ID. Then out of nowhere, another vehicle pulled up, a plain, unmarked car. A man in civilian clothes stepped out, clearly an authority figure. His arrival shifted the energy instantly. Who was he? And why was he getting involved? The stakes were suddenly higher, and everything hung in the balance. The man from the unmarked car approached with a calm but commanding presence. The officers immediately straightened up, their frustration giving way to something resembling caution. He introduced himself as a higher-ranking official and asked what was going on. The lead officer tried to explain the situation, framing it as routine, but the man in the car quickly interjected. "With all due respect, sir, I've been calm and cooperative. I've asked multiple times if I'm being detained, and they haven't answered." The official turned to the officers, his expression unreadable. "Is there any specific reason for this stop? Do we have probable cause?" he asked, his tone sharp but professional. The lead officer hesitated, his earlier confidence now wavering. "We thought he matched a description," he finally said. But the official wasn't buying it. "Thought? That's not good enough. Unless you have something solid, we're done here." He turned to the man in the car, nodding slightly. "Thank you for staying calm. You're free to go." As the man rolled up his window, the tension seemed to dissolve, until he said something that caught everyone off guard. "I'll be filing a formal complaint. This isn't how the law works." The official's face tightened, and the lead officer shifted uncomfortably. The man drove away, leaving behind a scene of stunned silence. But for the officers, the story wasn't over. They knew they'd have to answer for what just happened, and the encounter had left everyone, including the watching crowd, with a lot to think about. As the man drove off, the crowd slowly began to disperse, murmuring about what they had just witnessed. Some were impressed by how he stood his ground, while others seemed surprised at how quickly the situation had shifted once the higher-ranking official arrived. It was a moment that left everyone thinking about the importance of knowing your rights and how much of a difference staying calm and composed can make. For the officers, the encounter was clearly a wake-up call. Their confidence had turned to uncertainty, and now they were left to face the consequences of their actions. The official who intervened didn't let it slide, pulling them aside for what looked like a serious conversation. The tension may have been gone, but the lessons from this moment weren't going to be forgotten anytime soon. For the man, it wasn't just about winning the encounter. It was about proving a point. He had shown that standing firm, knowing your rights, and staying respectful could turn even the most intimidating situations around. And for anyone watching, it was a powerful reminder. Understanding the law isn't just helpful, it's essential.